That day was the moment Jamal Anderson had been eagerly waiting for, a 17-year-old teenager living in the suburbs with his family. The sky was clear without a cloud in sight, and the sun shone brightly above, as if blessing this special day. Jamal had just obtained his driver's license after weeks of intense practice in parking lots and on highways with his patient father, Mr. Anderson. In the cozy living room of their modest yet loving home, his father smiled proudly as Jamal waved his brand new driver's license. "Finally, you did it, son," Mr. Anderson said with pride in his voice. "Thanks, Dad. I can't wait to drive on my own," Jamal replied, his eyes gleaming with excitement, imagining the freedom that awaited him. For him, having a license was a big step toward independence, something he had always dreamed of. But today was going to be more than just a moment of celebration. Without Jamal knowing, his father had planned a big surprise. In the small garage next to their house, hidden away, was a used car that Mr. Anderson had been polishing and repairing for the past few weeks. It wasn't a luxury car, just an old sedan he had bought from a neighbor moving out of town. But to the Anderson family, the car carried deep meaning, a symbol of years of sacrifice and hard work. After breakfast, Mr. Anderson led Jamal to the backyard. "I have something to show you," he said with a mysterious tone, heading toward the garage. Jamal followed his father, furrowing his brows, curious about what was happening. When Mr. Anderson opened the garage door, there stood the old sedan, its fresh coat of paint gleaming under the sunlight. Jamal froze for a moment, unable to believe what he was seeing. "This is for me," his voice was almost disbelieving. Mr. Anderson nodded, smiling proudly at his son's reaction. "Yes, it's yours now. I know it's not a new car, but I've been saving up for a long time to give you something you can be proud of. You're growing up, Jamal. This is part of your responsibility to learn how to be more mature." Jamal stared at the car, running his hand along the cool, smooth surface of the hood. Though the car was old, it was a symbol of his parents' love and sacrifice. His father didn't have much money, but he had always made sure Jamal lacked nothing. And now, this car stood as proof of all his father's hard work. A wave of emotion swelled in Jamal's chest. "Thank you, Dad. This is more than enough. I can't tell you how grateful I am," he said, his voice hoarse. "Take good care of it, okay? This car holds a lot of memories for your family too," Mr. Anderson said, patting his son on the shoulder. "Now go, pick up your friend Marcus and enjoy your ride. But remember, be careful on the road." Jamal nodded enthusiastically, quickly calling Marcus, his best friend since childhood. Marcus arrived shortly after, and the two of them jumped into the car. The engine sputtered a little when it started, but to Jamal it sounded like music to his ears. Today was the day of his freedom, the day he would feel the wind blowing through the windows of his own car, driving with newfound confidence. They cruised through the small town, following familiar streets, though this time it felt different. Sitting behind the wheel, Jamal experienced an exhilarating sensation. He was the master of his own road now, and the smile on his face stayed with him throughout the journey. Marcus, sitting beside him, was just as excited. "Bro, this car is awesome. You gotta pick up some girls in this," Marcus joked, trying to tease Jamal. They both laughed, and the atmosphere inside the car was filled with joy and laughter. Their favorite hip-hop songs crackled through the old speakers, but it didn't matter. The road felt like it belonged to them, and life seemed so simple and full of happiness. Jamal couldn't stop smiling on this day. He felt like the world was in the palm of his hand. But behind all the fun and freedom he was savoring, Jamal didn't know that this perfect day would soon turn into a nightmare. Neither Jamal nor Marcus realized that in just a few moments something unexpected would happen, something that would change their view of the world and the injustice lurking around every corner. At the end of the street, a police patrol car slowly began following them from behind. The red and blue lights, soon to flash, would mark the moment that Jamal's perfect day would take a sudden and drastic turn. After spending almost an hour driving around, Jamal was becoming more comfortable with his new car. They had passed streets they used to bike through as kids, the park where they played basketball, and the neighborhoods where their friends lived. Everything felt so enjoyable and peaceful. The sun was starting to set, casting a warm glow on every corner of the town. Music from the speakers kept playing, maintaining the lively mood inside the car. However, not far behind them, unnoticed, a police patrol car began to approach. At first, Jamal didn't pay attention. He was too focused on enjoying the thrill of driving, occasionally chatting with Marcus about their weekend plans. But when the red and blue lights of the police car started flashing in the rearview mirror, Jamal's heart began to race. "Hey, there's a cop behind us," Marcus said, sensing something was off. The cheerful atmosphere inside the car suddenly turned tense. "Did you speed or something?" Marcus asked hesitantly, although Jamal was confident he had done nothing wrong. Jamal swallowed hard, trying to stay calm. No, I wasn't speeding. I followed every speed limit, he replied, glancing at the rearview mirror. He tried to reassure himself maybe it was just a routine check. Perhaps they only needed to inspect some paperwork or something simple. Following protocol, Jamal carefully pulled over to the side of the road. He turned off the engine and took a deep breath. Okay, stay calm. I'm sure it's nothing, he told Marcus, though a nagging fear lingered in his mind. He remembered all the stories he had heard about how interactions between police officers and black individuals could quickly turn bad. But he tried to stay positive. This was just a routine check, right? As the police officers stepped out of their patrol car, their heavy footsteps grew closer. Two officers approached with stern, tense expressions. One of them, tall with a thick mustache, seemed to be leading. His name was stitched onto his uniform, Officer Riley. His cold, suspicious gaze locked onto Jamal's car. Jamal had already rolled down the window and tried to smile, though his hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. Good evening, officer. Is there anything I can help with, he asked, hoping his polite tone would ease the tension. Without any greeting or explanation, Riley stared at Jamal with suspicion. Step out of the car, he ordered curtly, leaving no room for refusal. Jamal was startled by the officer's harsh tone. Something felt wrong. His heart beat faster, and fear began to creep in. Marcus, seated in the passenger seat, immediately pulled out his phone and started recording the encounter. He knew that in situations like this, video evidence could be their best defense. Bro, film everything, Marcus whispered, his eyes fixed on the approaching officer. Jamal slowly opened the door and stepped out of the car. As his feet touched the asphalt, he felt as if the weight of the world pressed down on him. Officer Riley's cold stare didn't waver, and now he stood just a few feet from Jamal, looking at him as if he were a criminal. Behind Riley, the younger officer seemed slightly hesitant, but he followed Riley's lead without a word. Jamal tried to remain calm. Officer, what's going on? Did I do something wrong? He asked in a low voice, though inside, anger mingled with fear. This car is stolen, Riley said coldly, offering no further explanation. His words hit Jamal like a sledgehammer. He was stunned. What? No way. This is my car. My dad gave it to me, Jamal exclaimed, his voice rising with shock. How could anyone accuse him of stealing a car that was legally his? But Officer Riley remained unmoved. His suspicious gaze grew sharper. Prove it. Where are the car's documents? He demanded, his eyes narrowing as if waiting to catch a lie. Jamal's blood boiled. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong, and the accusation was absurd. But he also knew, from all the stories he had heard, that situations like this could escalate in the blink of an eye. With shaky hands, he explained that the documents were at home, just a few blocks away. Marcus, still recording from inside the car, finally got out to speak up. Hey man, this isn't right. This car belongs to Jamal, I know that, he said, trying to de-escalate the situation. But Riley didn't seem interested in listening. Stay out of this, Riley snapped, causing Marcus to step back slightly. You're both in big trouble if this car turns out to be stolen. Riley's words made the atmosphere even more tense. Jamal could feel anger mixing with fear. He knew this wasn't just about the car anymore, it was about race and unfounded suspicion. He felt trapped, not just by the false accusation, but by a system that didn't favor young black men like him. Without another word, Riley pulled handcuffs from his belt. You're under arrest, he said coldly, forcing Jamal's hands behind his back. Jamal couldn't believe what was happening. The world around him seemed to slow down as the officer cuffed him without listening to any explanation. What had started as the best day of his life had now turned into a nightmare. Jamal stood handcuffed by the side of the road, watched by passers-by who began to stop and stare. Shame, anger, and helplessness churned inside him. Marcus kept recording, his voice shaky as he said, "This isn't right. This is wrong," but they both knew that his words might not matter to the officers. In just a matter of minutes, the freedom Jamal had felt vanished, replaced by the harsh grip of injustice. Jamal still couldn't believe what was happening. The sound of handcuffs locking around his wrists felt painfully real cold and tight, yet he felt like he was trapped in a nightmare. Time seemed to stand still as Officer Riley cuffed him in front of his best friend and the growing crowd of onlookers. Jamal hung his head, trying to process how a day that had started so perfectly could turn into the worst nightmare of his life. Marcus stood nearby, his phone still recording every second of the incident. His face was tense, filled with disbelief and anger. "This doesn't make any sense, bro. You didn't do anything," Marcus shouted, his voice hoarse with frustration, but no one seemed to care. "Shut up," "Or I'll take you in too," barked Officer Riley, without even glancing at Marcus, keeping his focus on Jamal, who was now cuffed. Jamal met Marcus's eyes, and in that brief exchange they shared the same fear. They both knew there was nothing they could do, two black teenagers who, in the eyes of the law, were guilty until proven innocent. The young officer standing behind Riley looked uneasy. His expression was different, not as stern as Riley's, as if he doubted whether what they were doing was right. But he remained silent, following Riley's lead without question. "Officer, please listen to me," Jamal said, trying to stay calm despite the fear spreading through his body. "This is my car. My dad bought it for me. All the documents are at home. We can go get them right now." But Riley dismissed Jamal's words with a scoff and a shake of his head. "Every criminal says that. They all say they're innocent," Riley sneered, then roughly guided Jamal toward the patrol car. "You can explain everything at the station." Jamal stumbled as Riley shoved him into the back of the patrol car. The cold metal of the interior pressed against him, making the sense of powerlessness even more suffocating. The door slammed shut with a heavy clang, locking him inside the steel cage. Through the barred window, he could see Marcus still recording, his face now shifting from anger to despair. Inside the patrol car, Jamal sat in silence. His gaze was fixed on the passing scenery, which grew blurry as tears welled up in his eyes. He didn't want to cry, especially not in front of the officers who treated him this way. But the frustration, injustice, and helplessness weighed on him, like the entire world was pressing down on his chest. Outside, Marcus tried to reason with the young officer. "You have to understand, man. This isn't right. He didn't do anything. I can prove it," but the young officer only looked down, avoiding eye contact, nervously glancing away as if unsure of what to do. Meanwhile, Jamal sat quietly inside the patrol car, feeling more and more disconnected from the world outside. Marcus's voice became distant, fading into the background. Jamal knew he was innocent, but it felt like the truth didn't matter. The police, who were supposed to protect people, had accused him without any evidence or consideration. As the patrol car began to move, Jamal felt his freedom, something he had experienced just hours ago, slip away completely. It was as if it had been ripped from him without any chance to defend himself or explain. Marcus stood on the side of the road, watching helplessly as the police car drove away with his best friend inside. His phone was still recording, but deep down he knew the footage might not be enough to change anything. He felt a mix of anger, disappointment, and helplessness. But in the back of his mind, Marcus knew he couldn't just stand by and do nothing. Inside the patrol car, Jamal closed his eyes, trying to calm his mind. He thought about his family, his father, who had worked hard to buy him the car, and his mother, who always told him to stay strong and never give up. He thought about his younger siblings, who might not understand why their big brother had been arrested for no reason. But more than anything, Jamal felt afraid. Afraid of what might happen next. Afraid of a system that seemed to be stacked against people like him. Jamal knew this was no longer just about him. It was the reality faced by many black teenagers across the country: baseless accusations, unjust suspicion, and unfair treatment. It was a system that had long oppressed them, and now Jamal was experiencing firsthand how crushing that reality could be. The police car drove on, taking Jamal farther away from his friends, his family, and the normal life he once knew. And though fear and anxiety weighed heavily on him, a quiet determination began to grow within his heart. Jamal knew he had to find a way to fight this injustice. But how? In the midst of his confusion, one thing was certain: he would not let this injustice silence him. And in the quiet confines of the patrol car, Jamal made a promise to himself: no matter what happened, he would resist. Inside the speeding patrol car, Jamal sat silently with his hands cuffed behind his back. The air felt stifling, mirroring the suffocating pressure tightening around his chest. The streets outside passed by meaninglessly behind the barred windows, while his mind raced, searching for answers to questions he could never voice. Why me? What do they want? Jamal knew this wasn't just about him. He was just one of many black teenagers mistreated by a system that was supposed to protect them. Anger began to creep into his heart, surpassing the fear that had gripped him from the start. He wasn't going to let himself be destroyed by false accusations. He would fight. Up front, Officer Riley glanced at him through the rearview mirror, seeing Jamal's still body but piercing gaze. Riley scoffed, unmoved by the injustice he was perpetuating. "Think you're going to get away with stealing a car, huh? Kids like you do this all the time," Riley said coldly, his words dripping with prejudice. Jamal lifted his head, meeting Riley's eyes in the mirror. For the first time since his arrest, he felt the need to speak. "That car is mine," Jamal said calmly but firmly. "I didn't steal anything. The paperwork's at my house just a few blocks away. You can check it yourself." But Riley didn't care. To him, Every word from a black teenager's mouth was just another lie. The young officer sitting beside Riley shifted uncomfortably, his expression softening as he heard Jamal's statement. He looked as if he wanted to say something, but fear or misplaced loyalty kept him silent, forcing him to stare straight ahead. When they arrived at the police station, Jamal was roughly pulled out of the car. The cuffs bit deeper into his wrists as he was forced to walk into the building. The cool air outside felt refreshing, but every step toward the station was a grim reminder of the fate that might await him. Inside, the atmosphere was rigid. Several officers at their desks glanced at Jamal with dismissive, judgmental looks. A female officer at the front desk peered over her glasses, uninterested in what was happening. Riley stomped over, dropping the arrest documents on the desk without a word. "I want to speak to a lawyer," Jamal said, holding back his emotions. He knew he needed to stay calm. He couldn't afford to lose his temper in a place that clearly wasn't on his side. Riley chuckled darkly. "A lawyer? For what? You don't need one to confess that you stole a car." "But I didn't steal it," Jamal replied, his voice steady and firm. "And I have the right to a defense." The young officer beside Riley fidgeted nervously. Finally, he spoke, his voice shaky but audible. "Maybe we should check the car's paperwork before going any further, sir. He might be telling the truth." Riley shot him a sharp glare, brimming with anger. "This is obviously a stolen car. Don't let him fool you." But Riley's grip on the situation was starting to slip. Some of the other officers in the room were beginning to sense the injustice unfolding before them. One senior officer seated in the corner observed the interaction closely. His face tightened with concern as he listened to Riley's accusations. He stood and walked over. "Is there a problem here?" the senior officer asked, his sharp gaze fixed on Riley. Jamal turned, hoping this might be his chance to explain. "He claims the car is his," Riley said dismissively, trying to wrap the situation up quickly. "But I'm certain it's stolen." The senior officer, whose name tag read Captain Stevens, moved closer and studied Jamal with more objectivity than Riley had. "Can you explain the situation?" Sonny asked in a calm, measured tone. Jamal took a deep breath before responding. "It's my car, sir. My dad bought it for me. All the paperwork is at my house. Marcus, my friend, can confirm everything. We were just out for a drive. I didn't steal anything." Stevens gave a slow nod and then turned to the young officer next to Riley. "Go with him to his house. Check the paperwork." Riley opened his mouth to protest, but Stevens quickly cut him off. "We're not here to arrest innocent people. Verify everything first." The young officer nodded and escorted Jamal to another patrol car. The ride to his house was tense, but a flicker of hope began to bloom within Jamal. He knew the truth was on his side, but in this world, truth often lost to power and prejudice. When they arrived at his house, Jamal retrieved a spare key hidden beneath a flower pot by the front door. The young officer stood awkwardly by the entrance, waiting. A few minutes later, Jamal returned with the car's paperwork, undeniable proof that the car was legally his. The young officer scanned the documents and gave a small, regretful nod. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, guilt evident in his voice. "I'll report this to the station right away." Jamal nodded, though his heart brimmed with anger. Was an apology enough to erase the humiliation and shame he had endured? Even though he was proven innocent, the bitter experience left a lasting scar. Back at the station, the young officer handed the documents to Captain Stevens, who promptly cleared Jamal of all charges. Riley, despite saying nothing, couldn't hide his frustration. But for Jamal, even with the charges dropped, the wound of injustice wouldn't heal easily. A determination began to grow inside him. He would make sure no one else had to go through what he just experienced. Jamal left the police station with mixed emotions. On one hand, he was relieved that the nightmare was over, that the absurd accusation of stealing his own car had finally been dismissed. But on the other hand, the anger boiling inside him had not subsided. He knew that although he escaped this time, many others in his position were not so fortunate. Marcus was waiting outside, his eyes glistening with tears as he saw his friend walk free. Marcus rushed toward Jamal and hugged him tightly. "I uploaded the video, bro," Marcus said quietly but with determination. "Everyone needs to know what happened to you." Jamal nodded, grateful for Marcus, who had stood by him through it all. "Thanks, bro. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there," he whispered, though his eyes remained distant, as if searching for something beyond just his physical freedom. That night when Jamal arrived home, his mother was waiting in the living room. Her face was filled with worry she couldn't hide, and as soon as she saw her son walk through the door, tears streamed down her cheeks. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes, Mom. I'm okay, Jamal replied, wrapping his arms around her. It's over. They released me, but deep down, he knew those words weren't entirely true. The fight against injustice was only beginning. After reassuring his mother that he was safe, Jamal went to his room. What was once his place of comfort now felt small, as if the walls bore silent witness to the injustice he had endured. He sat on the edge of his bed and turned on his phone. Notifications flooded and Marcus's video had spread quickly. The video captured everything: the baseless arrest, Riley's harsh treatment, and the glaring injustice. Hundreds of thousands of people had watched, liked, and commented. Many expressed anger, shock, or disgust at what Jamal had gone through. The hashtag Justice for Jamal began trending across social media within hours. But beyond sympathy, something more significant was growing from the incident. People weren't just seeing Jamal as a victim, they saw him as a symbol of a much larger issue. Conversations about police brutality, racial discrimination, and systemic injustice started to emerge across various platforms. People began speaking out, and their voices grew louder. Marcus called Jamal shortly afterward. "Have you seen the video?" Marcus asked, his voice filled with excitement. "It's blowing up, bro. People are talking about you everywhere." "Yeah, I saw it," Jamal replied, trying to process everything. "I don't know what to do now. This is all happening so fast." "You can't stay quiet, man. This is our chance to speak out. We can be the change people have been waiting for," Marcus urged passionately. "You need to tell your story. If you step up, you could help so many others." Jamal fell silent, thinking about Marcus's words. He knew his friend was right. The painful experience he had just gone through had to become something bigger. He couldn't let it pass without making a difference. He had to take a stand, not just for himself, but for everyone who faced the same injustice. The next morning, as the sun began to rise, Jamal opened his laptop. He wrote an open letter on his social media, sharing his story in depth, how he felt when the cuffs went on, the helplessness he felt when no one listened, and how racial prejudice had become a part of everyday life for many people like him. He wrote not just for himself, but for everyone who had experienced what he had. Within hours, the letter went viral. Support poured in from across the country, not just from the Black community, but from people of all backgrounds who were fed up with the injustice happening right before their eyes. The media picked up his story, and conversations about police reform and the treatment of minorities became front-page news everywhere. Later that afternoon, a human rights organization focused on racial justice contacted Jamal. They wanted him to speak at a nationally broadcast forum, sharing his experience to inspire others to fight against injustice. Jamal hesitated. He wasn't an activist, just a teenager who had survived one of the worst experiences of his life. But deep down, he knew this was the moment to take a stand. With support from Marcus and his family, Jamal accepted the invitation. "I can't stay silent," Jamal said one night as they sat together in his living room. "This is bigger than me. I have to speak not just for myself, but for everyone who can't." Marcus smiled proudly. "I knew you'd say that. You were born for this, bro." A few days later, Jamal stood in front of a microphone, facing thousands of people who had come to hear his story. Cameras from various news stations focused on him, and millions of people waited at home to hear what he had to say. Taking a deep breath, Jamal began to speak. "This isn't just about me. It's about all of us, about those who can't speak, those who are treated unfairly just because of the color of their skin. It's about the fear we feel every time we encounter the very people who are supposed to protect us but see us as a threat instead." Jamal's voice was strong and clear, filled with a newfound confidence. "We won't stay silent anymore. Justice must be served not just for me, but for everyone." And at that moment, Jamal knew his journey had only just begun.